On their advice, Miss Gray rented a tiny cabin from Peter and Sal, not far from the newer, larger cabin he'd built closer to his smithy. They'd mentioned to Rollie just the week before their intention to rent it out on a short-term basis to newcomers. It had been Peter's first abode when he'd come to town. Then he'd met Sal, the woman who'd tended his wounds after the grievous, vicious battle Cleve Danziger and his band of men, one of the many head-hunting hordes seeking the bounty on Rollie's pate, had brought to the town. She'd tended Peter's wounds, they'd hit it off, and her days of drifting from one man's camp to another had ended. What she'd sought and not found with any of them, she finally found with Peter, and he with her. Though he never mentioned it to anyone, in an odd way, Rollie felt responsible for them having found each other in such a manner. Their happiness brought him happiness. He'd not found it himself thus far with any woman, but then again he'd never sought it for longer than a quiet, humbling experience with a prostitute could bring. Of late he'd been keeping a regular weekly appointment with Madge Gladwell, the madam of the women who'd moved in and taken over Chauncey's aborted town hall. Madge had quietly paid off Chauncey's substantial outstanding debt on the unfinished structure. She had also since come to terms with Chauncey, who knew what that might mean, and purchased the land on which the building sat, ending his dreams of owning and operating a grand hotel or town meeting hall. No one quite knew what Chauncey's dream for the property had been. It also meant she was committed to staying in Boar Gulch, at least for the time being. The thought of seeing the buxom, intelligent, handsome, and no-nonsense woman on a regular basis for the foreseeable future pleased Rollie. Having Tish Gray up at Peter's place, and under Sal's kindly but watchful eye, would hopefully result in some sort of friendship with the slightly older woman that might keep the girl out of his way for more hours of the day than he cared to spend around her. She'd been in the gulch less than 48 hours, and already he was annoyed more by her questions than he had been by anyone in a good many years. By late in the second day, he'd managed to evade answering some of her more probing questions. How do you obtain confessions from someone who perhaps has lost the ability to speak, whether it be an affliction from birth or say they had their tongue cut out by a band of rogues worse than they?